Alright, I'll be talking about Windover Pond. I'm Sheridan, Austad. Alright, so pottery begins in 4500 BC. The Great Pyramid of Egypt is in 2540 BC. King Tut is dated back to 1342 BC. And writing is dated back to 600 BC. Now you may be thinking, okay, this is great, but when is Wendover playing all this? Actually, Wendover is before any of this. It's actually dated back to 5000 BC, which is 7,000 years ago, which is 3,200 years before King Tut and 2,000 years before the Great Pyramid of Egypt. The people at Windover Pond are from the Archaic period, which is a time period dating between 9,500 and 3,000 years ago. Okay, so what is Wendover? Wendover Pond is a mortuary pond, which basically is a fancy word for saying it's a cemetery inside of water. It's actually located in Brevard County near Titusville, Florida. For those of you who know where that is, you know that's local, which is really impressive that Florida has something like this. If the conditions were typical in Windover Pond, the remains, such as the bones, the fabric, and brain tissue and everything, would have dissolved. Which these are, thank God, this is not typical. This Windover Pond is actually the 5th mortuary pond found in Florida, the other 4 being Warm Mineral Salt Springs, Little Salt Springs, Bay West, and Republic Groves. Mortuary ponds were actually a trend in the Archaic period, but slowly stopped as time went on, probably because there was nobody wanted to do it anymore. Okay, significance. Okay, so the preservation of remains at Windover are immaculate. There was, because of the anaerobic conditions, which basically means that it was low oxygen concentration, the acidic environment, which Florida's soil is notorious for having, and the neutral pH. Because of all those things, we are able to get brain matter, DNA, fabric, and bones, as well as wood and other objects. Mortuary ponds are only located in Florida, which again adds to the significance of Windover. And again, there were 4 other located in Florida. So bones, stones, and shells, which are usually the only 3 things found at archaic sites, those were not the only ones found here. There was also, again, like I've said, soft tissue and fabric. There's been another pond another cemetery that has recorded brain matter, but that was in a medieval Danish cemetery. Other than that, I don't know of any other ones. The brain matter that was found at Windover actually shrunk to 1/4 of their size, but still retained their original shape. We again have high sulfur levels, high mineralized water, and anaerobic conditions to thank for the preservation of the remains at Windover. Okay, so excavations. Excavations at Windover actually had a bumpy start because there was a backhoe worker who was moving a road down in Brevard County to another site. He was moving the road and he found what looked like to be a rock. He picked it up, examined it a little bit, and figured out it was actually a skull. So of course he then had to call for backup. Backup came and they looked around and found more bones. Those bones actually sat in water in a bucket on a trailer for quite some time after it because they couldn't find any archaeologist or anthropologist to dig them up. Also, the funding, nobody wanted to fund a site that could possibly have nothing. And the pond was actually altered before the archaeologists came because of the road that was being built. They had to put sand in some areas, and in other areas they just they had to take away some of the peat, which is the stuff in the mud on the bottom of the pond. They had to take away some of that in some of the areas. There are still barrels in the deep sections of the pond, and they may even extend underneath the current road that's there right now. But unfortunately, excavation had to stop after 3 years because in order to excavate a pond, you have to take all the water out, and they only had so much area of no water, so they had to stop where that area ended, which are called well points. Okay, so how were the dead buried? This is just another picture. Okay, so the dead were buried in the peat, which is, again, the bottom of the pond, the mud. They were covered in cloth, which was handmade, and they had sticks, which are in a TV style, which you can see right here, that were you can't really see, but right here you can see that there's, the stick goes through the cloth in the TV style over the burials, and the burials were usually laid on their side and flexed. They might have been like this because to protect them from predators, or they might have had the teepees out like this, so you could actually see them outside of the water. They could have been like that also to show where individuals have been buried, such as family members or groups of family members. They were placed in the deep section of the pond because in order to have such preservation, you had to have the remains be completely covered in water. So they couldn't just be on the bank of the pond. They were buried in the late summer, early fall season around that area, and they were buried there from generation to generation. The Windover people would travel and then come back to the pond to bury their dead, and anybody who died while they were in that area was buried here. We know that they were buried here from generation to generation because of radiocarbon dating on the sticks. Also, we know that the people at Wendover also took very good care of their dead, because if one of the burials was sloping, if it was in an area of the peat that was sloping down, they would move it to a different location, which eventually created problems when they started to excavate it, because it was basically just a heap of bodies in one area where they had moved them all. Okay. Where were the dead buried? Okay. So, sorry, I lost my place here. Okay, I'm sorry, when were the dead buried? Okay, this goes back to the late summer, early fall seasons. Okay, so the adults at Wendover were buried within 48 hours of death. The children, on the other hand, were buried much later. We're not entirely sure why that is. It could have been because the children were harder to let go, or because they just didn't, I'm not sure, they don't really know why. But that's when they were, sorry. Okay, and then what was found with the burials? Okay, so textiles were found with the burials. This is actually a replication of some of the fabric that was found at the burials. They were textiles like this that are this preserved are seldom found at archaic sites because, again, usually the conditions are not anaerobic, and so they have a lot of oxygen in there that deteriorates everything. The textiles, most of the wraps and stuff were, okay, so they had capes, bags, strings, tunics, and cords. Those are a couple examples. There was also wraps, the wraps that they were used to being buried in. They were made from vegetable fibers, and they were made on a fixed frame and handcrafted, and they are considered a lost art because as time went on, they didn't use that fixed frame. It wasn't as intricate as it was 5,000 years later. It wasn't as intricate as it is now. There is also evidence of medicine in some of the burials. There is grapeseed as well as nightshade, and there's a lot of other ones. They are used for natural pain relievers and natural, relaxants and stuff like that. So those were also found as well. Okay, so based on the remains, again, we know that they used medicine. They had a really hard time with anemia and tooth decay. So we know that they had a really bad time with anemia because of cribia orbitalia, which those of you who don't know what that is, That's this. It's characterized by these little things right here. They're holes in the eye sockets. So that would be an example of how they suffer from anemia. Some of the burials actually had that, but it was healed over time, which showed that. And then linear enamel hypoplasia, which is this, which is characterized by lines across the teeth, horizontal lines, which again is a sign of anemia. It's also a sign that the Wendover people did not have enough nutrition, which could be because they had a lot of plant-based diet. Their diet was very plant-based, which is harder to receive the adequate iron when you have a plant-based diet, which anemia is less iron. And then spina bifida, which I would put a picture of here, but it's kind of gross, so I didn't want to gross anybody out. It's when your vertebrae doesn't completely close at birth, which is another example of anemia. And if you were to have spina bifida nowadays, you would be paralyzed, which they were paralyzed. And there was a case of a little boy who lived to be about 18 years old. He was paralyzed, and they had to have people come and clothe him and feed him and bathe him and everything like that. So that shows that the Wendover people actually had enough time to do that, to take care of their people and not spend the entire time scavenging for food. Also, the textiles that they have, the intricacy of the textiles shows that they had to have time to make that stuff instead of going out and looking for food. Okay, so in conclusion, I have told you where Wendover is. I have told you about the preservation, about their health, and the photo credit of a lot of these pictures is for Florida Public Archaeology Network. That's it.